our countdown to Christmas, we've thought about the impact of Jesus, his life and his death. Jesus died at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and yet within 48 hours, people were saying he has risen. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said this: either Jesus rose on Easter Day or he did not. And if he really did rise from the dead, if he really died for our sake, then this is so overwhelming that it must permeate our entire life. He was saying, if Jesus really did rise from the dead, then it should turn our world upside down. And the resurrection of Jesus means that he must really have been who he said he was. It must mean that though he was a man, he was also God. If, however, Jesus did not rise from the dead, then why should we pay any attention to what he has to say? If Jesus did not rise from the dead, then Christianity collapses. It's perhaps useful for a bit of social cohesion, a good sing-song, candles at Christmas, a time for the family, Christmas decorations and lights. But he is no longer someone life-changing, and therefore we need to ask, is the resurrection of Jesus historical fact? You might like the idea of going to a church at Christmas and enjoying it. You might enjoy the atmosphere and the tradition of it. But Christianity is based on truth. The Bible does not call you to blind faith. Christianity is based on the historical fact of the resurrection. And so let's consider, today and tomorrow, did it really happen? The Gospel writer Luke records that it was women who first discovered the empty tomb. And the significance of that is that women in first century Jewish culture were not considered to be reliable witnesses. If you were to write what you might consider to be the most compelling and convincing account of the resurrection at that time in history, you would put men on the scene. The only reason Luke would put women there first was if that's the way it really happened. We find in the Gospels that the men, when they heard the news, did not believe it. They considered it to be an idle tale. But not long after, we find these same men in Jerusalem preaching boldly that Jesus died and rose. And now Jerusalem was the city where a few weeks earlier Jesus had been welcomed and hailed as king. His entrance riding on a donkey had caused a stir. It was also in Jerusalem that the crowds had turned against him, and they cried out for his crucifixion. The point is, everyone who'd been in Jerusalem would know about Jesus, including what happened to him, his death on the cross. Just a few weeks after his death, the disciples were boldly preaching that he had risen. Everyone would have known who they were talking about. They'd have heard about his entrance into Jerusalem, even if they weren't there. They'd have heard about his death on the cross, even if they weren't there. And so would the disciples have got away with preaching that Jesus is risen if Jesus' body lay in a local tomb? Their preaching would soon have been quashed. But no body is produced from any tomb in order to shut them up. Now, there were people who opposed the preaching of Jesus' disciples or apostles. But it's significant that the opposition didn't point to bones in a tomb. In Matthew's Gospel, we read this. Some soldiers who had been guarding the tomb went into the city. They told the chief priests everything that had happened. So the chief priests met with the leaders and decided to bribe the soldiers with a lot of money. They said to the soldiers, "Tell everyone that Jesus' disciples came during the night and stole his body while you were asleep. If the governor hears about this, we will talk to him. You don't have anything to worry about." The soldiers took the money and did what they were told. The Jewish people still tell each other this story. And the point is, the evidence of an empty tomb was too strong to deny. And the Jews opposing the disciples had to concede that the tomb was indeed empty. We need to understand that the last thing the enemies of Jesus wanted was an empty tomb. The empty tomb was only given substance to the message the disciples were preaching. So what about their explanation? Did the disciples steal the body away? Is that a plausible explanation for the empty tomb of Jesus? We'll come back tomorrow and we'll think about that then.